Hey, welcome to Philly Cocoa Side Project Spotlight, episode 4.
We'll get it eventually.
We'll remember this someday. So my name is Kotaro.
I'm Steve.
And I'm Aaron.
And we are here to chronicle our continued journey into making an exclusive kanji flashcard watch app for iOS, or watchOS, I guess. Philly Cocoa is a local meetup community of Apple developers. And our purpose is to help and support iOS and Apple or Mac developers on their journey to making awesome applications and products. In this particular season, we are trying to build our own watch app. This is kind of to hold us accountable to that as we record our progress every 2 weeks.
The last time we had talked, we had just gotten data working.
We were trying to flesh out the UI. Part of my sort of follow-up was to get more of the UI fleshed out, not only from a wireframe point of view, sort of like sketching out the layout and trying the visual layouts and theming of everything, but also do some implementations of that, as well as notifications for you.
In the notes from last episode, we were trying to get a working prototype of the swipe UI and saving of user stats.
Okay, so I failed on the swipe UI part, and I think that just speaks to my fear of the implementation process. I've been looking at a few implementations online, one being Deck UI. That is an interesting implementation, but it feels a little bit overkill for what we're trying to do. So I'm looking to try to implement a more simplified version of that. Yeah, that's my goal, is to finish that up this next sprint. But for the most part, I sort of try to lay out the pathways for like the main menu. I've also added like a quick onboarding that would sort of replace the import process. However we decided to do it, it just sort of has a welcome screen and you press continue. But during that period of time, in theory, that should give the app enough time to sort of process the JSON and to put it into core data, because it's like, what, a couple seconds, I think. And so for now, at least, the goal is to like have that onboarding there. And then when you press it, we save that the fact that you pressed that continue button in a user default. So just a plain old Boolean. So that way you never see that welcome screen again. And then you're just taken straight to the main menu, which allows 3 options. Card test to do your tests there manually. The list, which in this case, Aaron has updated to now only show the items that you had seen, the kanji that you have seen. And then settings, which is just basically all the configuration stuff that were put in later. So that was my, go ahead.
The onboarding screen looks good and it works. In fact, the import is so fast, I don't even notice when I've run it so far. So so I still don't know what it's going to be like on a really old watch, but I don't think it's going to be that big. And we could improve that UI a little bit if we want to. If we think it's going to be slow, we can put like a One
idea I had in mind, I definitely have in mind, is to create sort of like a completion handler for the data import, for us to know when the import is finished, so that we can block or provide some kind of UI indicator of like very subtly that there's something happening during that period.
There's some built-in SwiftUI now, aren't there, to do progress?
Yeah, so we could do something like an async await style approach.
No, I don't even mean that. I meant like the user interface elements.
There's something called a progress view. It's a spinner.
There's a spinner, but there's also ones that give you that illustrate the actual progress.
Oh, right.
They added them as part of complications, but I think you can use them elsewhere, and that's new. And I only know that because I was looking at complications the other day, looking at the WWDC video to try to figure out how the hell complications work.
Oh, that'd be great to add to the complication, just FYI.
You did get the onboarding screen done, and you're still working on the swipe UI.
That's my promise to you, to get that implementation done by this week.
You also linked to like the screens together, so we had a settings area. You could move from onboarding. So yeah, the app kind of was wireframe. Yeah,
basically skeleton app, the structure of the app. I also created wireframes to sort of help at least give us some visual guidelines of like where we can go with this app aesthetically if we want to like update the UI.
Yeah, I mean, I use that to add stuff I was working on into the app, into the existing framework, and I copied at least at one point I was copying the card design you had. At one point I was experimenting with it. Okay, so that's good. So how about, and Aaron, I had down that you were just supposed to be getting a public interface at a kanji database. So I mean, I think you were successful with that.
Yeah, it's a bunch of things for accessing like either a random kanji for like the notifications or just the next flashcard that you see, and also the stats tracking. So like really basic. It can, when you can say, oh, I I viewed it and it was correct or incorrect. And I updated the data model to actually say what was the last view that wasn't in there, and then link the entities together as a relationship.
Yeah, that's huge. So thanks for that.
It's a one-to-one relationship. Every kanji has a stats entity that goes with it, even though they're all nil when you get started. So I made sure that one is created the first time that you see it. If it doesn't have a stats entity yet, create the stats entity and assign it to that kanji. So that seems to be all working. But as far as I know, Kotaro said there was something, seems like a bug or something. What you're getting multiple views. I think that kind of has to do with the UI isn't right. You're not confirming and dismissing the card correctly I'm just kind of tapping on it and using the flip that we have to update stats, and it's not dismissing the card. So it's getting multiple things. But once the swipe UI is in there, it should work, I think.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense then. We should just swap that. We move that logic over to the swipe. Yeah. Makes sense.
So one thing I noticed as we're all independently working on this is that we're coming up with different vocabulary here to describe the same concepts. And, that's always something that happens with, when you have group projects. For instance, I'm just looking at the code right now, and in the user stats data manager, which is the new thing that Aaron made, I think you have did view, did confirm correct, did confirm incorrect. And I think the correct and incorrect is whether you knew the kanji or not.
Yeah. I always throw something in there. I would think about, what do I call this? And it's I don't know. I just need to make up a name, and we can refactor it with consistent naming once we decide on it.
Yeah, that's why I bring it up, just to illustrate for the listeners here that kind of thing is very normal. So some groups you might plan that before a sprint or something. Maybe you would come up with a shared vocabulary at some point. Or in our case, there's just three of us. We're just doing it, and then it's easy enough for us to just see this as it's happening and evolve. I was trying to think of the vocabulary for notifications, and I was thinking in terms of known and unknown is what was coming into my mind. I was trying to think about what does it mean to swipe on. What does it mean that I am correct or whatever on one of these kanji? And I was thinking, to me it said, I know this kanji or I don't know this kanji. So that's something we should nail down a little bit now that we have some user stats interface. But it sounds like Aaron is the one who got everything done on his list and then some.
Not everything.
I feel like such a slacker compared to Aaron.
Well, I didn't have too much to do this weekend, so I was just kind of doing everything the last 2 days.
Thank goodness for Aaron, because
I was doing everything yesterday. I got really busy this last week, and then the week before that, I was doing the podcast edit and stuff. And then so yesterday, I spent all day yesterday trying to get stuff working.
I think it's kind of funny because I do notice in this sprint, I had a fair amount of time the first week, and then my time just got really jambled the second week of this sprint. And the funny thing is I was planning on it in the way that I was thinking I was going to have the time in the second week. So it was unforeseen chaos, where I think going forward, my goal is to figure out a better plan of attack of making sure I get all the core things done. This is how I usually approach sprints. These in my mind, how I should be approaching sprints is the first week is to get all the features done, and then the fine tuning happens the second week, the bug fixes, so really focus on getting the feature bits done. And that's how I approach game jams, actually, is make sure that fundamentally the work is done in the first week, so that the second week I'm not panicking and going I need to do all these things and regretting all the decisions I've made that I sort of pushed off to the last second, in which case I just didn't do it for myself. So that is my retrospective going forward for this sprint, is to try to get that all done this week.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with you. I'm gonna try to adjust my time management.
What about you, Aaron?
I definitely most of the functionality that I've added is really bare bones. So I still don't really have any kind of algorithm to sort the stats. Well, because there wasn't any stats when I first made the class, so there wasn't any stats to work with. But now that we have some stats, I need my thing for generating a random one that is appropriate for the where the user is at with how many they've seen. I need to work on that. And
one of the interesting things I also consider the settings to be is almost like our configuration manager. You can look at it that way as well. So maybe consider adding some sections in there for yourself, just to say, okay, where the user is, for example.
Yeah, I was thinking about doing that. Yeah.
Beginner level, intermediate level, and then advanced level, right? And then that way that will allow or opportunities to like say, okay, we're going to start them off with like a really hard one versus like intermediate one. And that'll also help you in your progression of testing, like in terms of like, I don't want.
Yeah, I was going to like turn it down for testing like to only like 20 or something, like the first 20 in the ordering.
This also would be a great time to add like a reset button and even a clear button to just remove everything from the database.
Yeah, I was at one point trying to get some things like wired up like that for debugging purposes in the settings screen. Like there was some different approaches I was trying, and it just didn't work out. So it's not in the code base. But I was trying to create I was probably going to create a debug menu. At one point, I kind of had a debug menu I was starting, and I was just only going to be available only if we were like building the debug version of it. And, but it didn't quite work out, and I ended up doing something. But anyway, that's a good idea. We do need some better tooling for testing now that we actually are we have actual data in there, and we're going to try to record user stats.
So can I lean on you for that this coming sprint?
Who's you?
Aaron.
Yeah, I get. So you want like a whole new debug thing, like a whole new view?
Yeah.
My day job app, one of the first things I did was on the settings screen, I had two options actually. I had like a logout option, but I had a reset the app option, and I had a clear a cache option, so they were like slightly different. But I had the reset app option, which is a nuke option, like literally deleted everything, and just to get it back to like as close as possible to the state the app was in when it was initially installed on the App Store.
My point of view about it is much more about just take the settings view, add all the buttons of like reset, delete database, import database, whatever, re-import or whatever you want to whatever is good for you, and then we can kind of like flesh out what ultimately will be useful to the user. But we definitely want to have a view for that. I mean, eventually we could just move that into a debug view in itself, but for now, just put in the settings view so we just have an easy access to it, because nobody cares at the moment.
Yeah, I've been thinking about doing something like that anyway, so yeah, I can start adding some now that the settings view is useful.
Yeah, you're right. It doesn't really matter. Yeah, sometimes you gotta build your own tools here. I guess I didn't really do much about my retrospective, so I wrapped it up real quick. Notifications was my main thing. So I did get notifications wired up, although when we started this meeting, it wasn't working again. But I got notifications set up. I have a little area in settings that I started to flesh out where you can schedule what I'm calling prompts. So speaking of vocabulary, trying to think about what to call these things. I don't want to call them notifications. I'm not sure that was appropriate, but I don't know what the vocabulary would be. So I started calling them prompts and the idea would be that notification is just you checking yourself against one of these flashcards. But I have a section in settings for this, and then the idea is you're going to pick some time period. I'm not 100% sure what those times should be. That's something we need to talk about. But I did get the plumbing kind of wired up in SwiftUI and had some issues figuring that out. We can talk about, but it's not fully fleshed out. Much like Aaron, it's kind of just a skeleton thing right now, or it's not all the options are in there, right?
Well, now that the stats tracking thing is in there, you can wire up those buttons to actually track stats. It should work.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, the buttons. Well, everything about wiring it up took longer than it should have because notifications got way more complicated since the first time I implemented them years ago.
Yeah, you thought you just needed like one thing, but you need like a delegate, and you need
Oh my god, I'll go into it. I'll go into it on our next topics because it was a little bit of a trip. So notifications. Notifications. When I first did this was like many years ago. Notification used to be pretty simple when we had UI kit apps. You had some methods to override, and pretty much you could do that in app delegate, and you'd override some methods for receiving notifications and making sure that you got the authorization and everything. It's not too bad, right? And they didn't really do much. You didn't have anything to do with the UI of notifications early on. You would just whatever the payload was is what got shown by iOS, and you could tap the notification and go into it. And then they added later like buttons, and they added ways for you to intercept the message and do things with it, and add like images to it or like richer stuff. And then you have on watchOS these I don't know if it's just watchOS. We have dynamic notifications, which is like literally a SwiftUI view can be displayed. And because the watch has these short looks and these long looks, so it starts getting more complicated. And I'm looking at the documentation for it, and the documentation is all referencing UIKit stuff. And so like I'm like, how do I wire this stuff up? It was a little bit of an issue. So one of the first things I had to figure out was that when you're doing notifications, first thing I had to do is how do you authorize? You have to get authorization. So I was like, where do I even do this in a SwiftUI app? Because this is really my first SwiftUI app besides some tutorial thing. So I'm like, where do you actually go? And so one of the things things I tried different places. Typically, the recommendation is to get authorization like in context, and so you don't necessarily want to do it right when the app launches. But there is an option that Apple added, I think some years ago now, provisional. Was it iOS 14 maybe? Or was it 13 or 14? They had these provisional notifications. When they redid Notification Center, I think that's when they did this, where you can give notifications before you get explicit permission, and then they give you're asked for permission when the notification first comes in. And so I tried setting that up, and I thought it was working, but we'll see. But I was trying to figure out where to do this app because we don't have an app delegate in a SwiftUI app. You have an app, a struct that follows the app protocol. Also, one of the things about I have a lot of issues with Swift. One of the things about Swift is it's not at all obvious when something is a subclass or something, or when it's just implementing a protocol, because for some reason it seems like the syntax doesn't distinguish that, which is really frustrating to me coming from like every other language I use where it's clear. But anyway, that's a separate thing. But yeah, because this app thing, I'm like, where do I put this? How does this work? And so I actually added an init method to that class, or that struct. I keep saying class because you can tell I mostly work in different languages. So I added it. I put it in the init there to request the authorization. I thought it was working, but now I'm not so sure. So I have to check again.
It's interesting because I remember seeing some docs about it, either WindowGroup or some other tutorial site. One of the things, if you're just trying to get access to the in background, or I think there are some modifiers within Window, I forgot what they call it in SwiftUI. It's like in the Windows group where you can like check if it's active or it's just background. Like for an example of like if it's in the background or if going into the background or coming back from the back, I think.
Oh, yeah. There's the scene phases. I found that out looking to Apple because I was trying. One of the things I was also trying to find out is what are the life cycle hooks, because in UIKit you have an app delegate. An app delegate has some very defined methods that get called at different times. It's like everybody's used to this in iOS development, that you have certain methods going to be called, and you can understand the states. But with SwiftUI, I was like, where is this? Because I was just thinking along the lines you are thinking, Kotaro. I was like, well, normally I do this, after the app finishes launching, launch with options or whatever. And I was like, well, what's the equivalent of that? Or what's the equivalent of when the app becomes active? And really what I wanted was when the app first launches, because I don't need to get authorization every single time necessarily. It kind of sticks around. You're supposed to call it all the time, so it didn't really matter. But I was looking and I didn't know. So I ended up with, I did start down the path of using the scene phases, but I thought that it was working with the init, so I didn't need to go there. But maybe I'll refactor it, especially if it's not quite working. But I also found the init because that's supposed to go first. I thought that's supposed to. I thought that's it would come before the scene builder stuff. One of the things about this whole interface here, it's like you go to the body property where the meat of the app, I don't know what we call the app struct is, and that whole thing, it's like one of those SwiftUI things where to me and to my eyes it looks like, oh, this looks like a function or something, but it's not. You can't just put regular Swift calls in there. It just freaks out and has like, because it's not, because it's a SwiftUI thing. It needs to be SwiftUI things or something in there sometimes.
So I guess what you can do, to be fair, like because it's a UI, right, you sort of have to break out. That's why sort of like a view model or MVVM style approach actually works really well in SwiftUI, because you kind of want to keep that out of that logic. And I think you add the logic in your modifier, like your task or on-chain modifiers, as an example.
So I guess my point is that I haven't quite transitioned my mental model to the way SwiftUI wants to do things, and so I'm hitting a lot of friction points that are stupid if you understand this stuff. But if you're not used to working in this, which I'm not, the friction points keep slowing me down a lot, even for simple tasks. Like I shouldn't have taken me as long as it did to get what I got working. But that's what happens when you're doing things in a brand new kind of environment for you or in a new framework. And then that doesn't even get into how much Xcode has been a huge pain. It's just I don't understand what's wrong with this build of Xcode. It's so broken this year. It's the syntax checking, especially. They're trying, but I have to keep restarting Xcode, and it's so aggressive with the syntax checking and giving you errors, and sometimes the errors don't make any sense, and you're like, is that even an error? Or it would just take a long time for it to even pick up that there is no error anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, it's gotten a lot better.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm running on an M1 13-inch M1, which until recently was the fastest MacBook Pro like you could have until recently. Like, I have a fast enough computer for SwiftUI. It's like, what did they build SwiftUI for? Like, what computer if it can't handle it? But so my difficulties were really around the mental model. But I got, as I was saying, going all the way back to notifications. First thing you have to do is get the authorization, and once you have that done, then there's like all these pieces, and it's not very SwiftUI like at all. Notifications are still very much, at least according to the documentation I was reading, they're very much in the UI kit world. Like, you have a delegate, there's a delegate to implement, there's like classes to implement, and so I created there's already a built-in notification controller in the template for Xcode that we used, which is actually just a subclass of WK user notifications hosting controller, which is basically a fancy way of saying this is how they integrate the notifications stuff with SwiftUI, because again, it's not built for SwiftUI. It's much older than that. So then they have some methods to override much more traditional things. But so much stuff flows through like one method, like did receive. It's giving me flashbacks to when I initially started working on app delegates, and everything was in there. Everything is in one method. And I was trying to figure out how to do it. I feel like the documentation is in some ways clear, in other ways not at all clear, because like, just tell me where to put the file for one thing. Here's like a tip for writing documentation. Assume I literally have no idea what I'm doing. Just like assume I have no idea where to put the file. Like, don't just give me a snippet of code that says, oh, implement this method. And people do this on Stack Overflow too all the time. Tell me what the file is you're putting in. Because I got to the point where I was like, where do I put this code? There's no app delegate anymore. So where do I put some of this code? I'll get that. So the notification controller, though, I had to implement. And that is the thing that actually you use to show the actual view that represents your notification, because we want to do these custom views, which is a new thing to me, a new SwiftUI view. So I made a SwiftUI view for the notification, and it doesn't have a lot in there at the moment, but there is a notification view, and then you have to populate that view with whatever information you get in the notification payload. So that's the thing that's complicated about notifications is, in our case, we run them locally, but you implement them essentially the same way, whether it's local or remote. There's some JSON that's coming in. It has some defined keys that need to be there for everything to work, like your title, right? But then you put whatever else you want in there that you need, and you have to give it like a category name. You have to give it to link all this stuff together, and then you have to like parse out whatever information you want by looking in, like the user info dictionary. And then basically in this notification controller, you just link everything together. You set up your view, and then iOS will display it. So once you understand that, it's a little more straightforward. But I swear to you, I read the documentation like multiple times. I'm like, what? How does this work? Because it breaks it down into little steps, sort of. But if you don't have the whole picture in your head, it got a little confusing. Could have been also that I was tired or something, because I was doing it like last minute. Don't do the stuff last minute. And then I guess the other thing I needed to do that was completely different was, besides the view, there needed to be a controller, or there needed to be something that implemented UN user notification center delegate in order to handle buttons. So that was the other thing. So once you get notifications wired up, you ask permission, you wire up your SwiftUI view so that it'll show that view when you get a notification, right, of a certain payload. Then you can add buttons, because we want to try to mimic in notification form as much as we can what you can do when you're swiping. So to add the buttons in, you do that when you set up your view. But then I thought to myself, well, how do I actually respond to the button taps? How does that work? And this is where I was like reading the documentation. I was like, just tell me where the file is, because they said you had to, you have to have implement a method, new user, notification center, did receive with completion handler. I'm like, okay, great, but where? Like, I mean, in a UI kit thing, I would probably just start putting it in the app delegate, because that would be an easy place just to start to get everything working before you refactor. But I'm like, where do I put this? Do I put it in the app struct? But that doesn't seem like that works. And that's like a weird struct thing. So can I just do whatever? And I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. And then so I just created a class, and I'm not even sure if it needs to be a class off of NS object or not, but it's what I did. I created a class, and then I just created a private let in the app struct, and that seems to work. I think I'm trying to make, it needs to be like only one instance of it in the app, and I think that's going to work. But you would tell me. I mean, you're more familiar with how this lifecycle works for this, because that's how Aaron has this persistence controller too, where it's just
Well, that was like based on the default thing, that default core data implementation that they give you when you say, I want to use core data with my app. So that's how they do it. So I don't know if that's the best way.
Right. Well, I basically the same thing, except I call the constructor though.
I mean, the way I've always viewed the relationship of structs and class in SwiftUI, at least, is much more of like the structs are much more for the layouts and the the values that I want to keep immutable. But if I have a class, I'm using a class, it's much for the data model and the stuff that is much more structured around data state that I can manipulate sort of in the background, if you will. And that gets updated consistently using observable objects and published properties. And then that way, if I'm changing anything that affects the state of the UI, I can just do that in the class itself. And I only have to instantiate that once in theory. Yeah, I mean,
yeah. And so I was thinking along those lines, and I'm not saying I did this right, but it was kind of working yesterday. So here's a mental model for the people who are maybe more beginners about this stuff. Like you need some piece of code that's in memory, right? Or just like it can be like initiated when you push a button on the notification. Like, what is going to respond to it? It needs to be somewhere in the app. It can't just not exist. Like the way that it's set up in iOS is it's expecting there to be a delegate. Like you have to set a delegate and delegate is like an old school concept at this point, but you have to set a delegate for in our case, the shared user notification center object, which is like a singleton that you can just access from anywhere in the app. So you have to, once you set that delegate somewhere on that shared singleton, it's established. But that means that the code that you're setting as a singleton can't become nil. It can't go out of memory. The reference count, if we're speaking reference counts, it can't go down to 0 or it'll be gone, right? So I was like, where do I put it? And traditionally you put that kind of thing on the app delegate, or you can, because the app delegate is someplace exists. It always exists, which is why it became a clearinghouse for junk, because you knew that at least that is the one class that's always going to exist in your app. So I was like, where do I put this? So I don't know if I'm doing this right, because I'm thinking along the terms still of the old school. But then again, notifications are still kind of in this weird in-between state where they have these adaptations for SwiftUI, but it's still very much, it has delegate callbacks. So, does anything in SwiftUI that's new have delegates? Is that even a concept that's used much anymore for new code?
If you consider like combine and that sort of like, or closures in a weird sort of fashion. But I think now that you have like, talking about delegates, you can still implement old school delegates or protocols for that matter to do that work. In many ways, that's what I'm referring to when using classes. All that logic, all the traditional logic that you would use in like Swift, you do that all in the class, and then you bubble that up to the view model, for which then it updates the views themselves. So you can sort of do all that sort of logic in a class, like separate, and then bring that and then update that up, like update the view model to update the view, and kind of do it that way.
Yeah, well, I like the pattern, the delegate pattern. I think it's just fallen out of it's not as mainstream anymore with SwiftUI.
It's weird because like it's interesting coming from traditional UI kit, and even like Objective-C particularly. It's like that was the pattern to go to when you had a situation like this where you need one to sort of understand what the other one's doing, so to speak. And then like Swift tried to get away from that with protocols and closures and that kind of stuff. And then here with SwiftUI, it's kind of like taking a full step further away from it, but you still have access to it. And I think that's the interesting thing about SwiftUI, Swift in general, is that those tools are still there. If you wanted to use NS notifications, you can still do that as another approach. People would say that's like, that's almost like old school, like that's as old school as it gets, but like that's a trick you can use.
That kind of brings me, if you want to, into the Objective-C versus Swift world, because again, I haven't done a lot of Swift recently, so every time, the main app I work on is still mostly Objective-C because I'm not going to rewrite all that stuff. And outside of that, I do a lot of stuff recently in C# and like Java type languages. Like these languages are not really much like Swift is, and Objective-C specifically, I really like, and I feel like all these new developers that come into iOS over the years and they only really handle Swift, they don't grasp how well designed in some ways the whole Objective-C concept was in the runtime. Like you had a language where you're just sending messages. It's very different than anything else. It's not like a dispatch table. You're sending like messages. There's a runtime in the middle there, and you can just send messages to objects. And if an object is nil, it doesn't crash necessarily. Because it's okay for things to be nil. So you get into this kind of habit of you don't worry so much about nil as much. Like you kind of implicitly check for nil, sometimes you like in an if statement or something, if something exists, but you don't worry that, oh, I'm going to call a method on something that doesn't exist and it's going to crash my whole app, because it usually doesn't. Usually, depending on what it is, I guess, but because you're not really calling a method in a traditional sense, you're sending a message, and that concept, once you get in your head, it makes Objective C, I think, a little bit more, I don't know, flexible some ways. I mean, it's very much different verbosity wise.
I don't think it slaps you on the hand as hard as Swift will. It's actually kind of funny that you mentioned that, because like Swift, now that we're moving to like async await, that will slap you on the hand even harder. It's great though. I mean, I like it for the sense like it's trying to enforce some level of discipline. Having said that, I think my struggles are the same was the same when I was first starting with Swift. The toughest part is getting, a lot of times you're doing a lot of things like people would do unique different techniques to sort of identify it or like account for like if something is nil, right? So like you're doing a lot of before you would do a lot of if let statements where you say, okay, if this value has a nil, don't do it. And then it evolved into doing guard statements. So you would say, okay, instead of doing you whenever you do it if let variable equals nil equals to ensure that there's no nil, a lot of times you might refactor that quickly and say, you know what, this is a guard statement, right? So then you just go straight to return and then call it a day.
Or like the syntax for Swift closures, like trailing closures, like there are choices that have been made in the evolution of the Swift language that I find somewhat baffling, because it's like they exist merely to look good in code snippets or something. But when you're actually trying to write the code, I got into situations where I'm trying to figure out literally how to write a method, and Xcode is giving me the method signature and it just won't like spit it out on the screen so that it works. It's weird. And it'll like, and I'm looking at example code for the same method signature, but because it's like, I think with the trailing closure syntax, it looks very different in the snippet than the template that Xcode's trying to spit out. And you're like, and you're trying to modify things. I was constantly getting error messages about the syntax being just so wrong. I'm like, geez, man, just like frustrating.
Well, what I find interesting is like, it's never quite clear, because there's like, feels like at least there's like 20 different ways to write the same code. Or it's like a closure is a great example of like, and I think once you get it, but it's like when you're starting out, like it's not as opinionated as you would want it to be.
Yeah, I just pick one. Like that's kind of the thing I have with Swift. It's in Objective-C, there was not like a gazillion ways of doing things. Like the syntax for closures is horrifying in Objective-C, but you can go into a website and like just find out the one kind of or the handful of ways of doing it. That's pretty horrifying. But
oh geez, I mean, I that's a tough part, because like Objective-C is very verbose, and that's what people are frightened about it. And the thing is, but
why are they frightened about that?
Because they're used to having to, like, if you're coming from like a JavaScript point of view, right? You're used to your code completion being, not as like complete. Like Objective-C will like you write the first two characters, and it's already written the full line of code for you. So it's
the tools actually work on Objective-C.
Toolings are great in Xcode for Objective-C, but the challenge is like you try to do that on some other, just a basic text editor or something, that's not going to fly. So I can understand people's like fright of Objective-C coming in.
Is it because of the, I mean, but what I don't get, is it really because of the verbosity? Because
well, I mean, they would do unnecessary things. I mean, they're necessary for Objective-C, but like, for example, just to like init a string, right? What do you have to type? NS string star var name equals NS string bracket init.
That part of the verbosity. Okay. Yeah.
Something allocate. Like there's a lot of verbosity, right? And it's like, you can do that very cleanly in Objective-C once you get the mental model, but it's like to get people on board, like, and then on top of that, you have to assign a string. It's like at quote, quote, semicolon, right? So like, there's a lot of unnecessary syntax, or it feels unnecessary to beginners, right?
Yeah, I keep breaking my Swift strings by putting at signs in front of the quotes, and I'm like, what's happening? And I'm like, what's happening? Why is it not working? Oh, because it's Swift, not Objective C. And then the other thing I keep doing is in SwiftUI, it's a lot of times the methods seem to want a text object, not just a string. And I for some reason I'm looking at the method signatures for certain things, and I just don't see the text thing, and I write strings in, and it just doesn't work. And I'm like 5 minutes later, I'm like, why is this not working?
In a bizarre way, Swift feels very friendly to a JavaScript or somebody coming from a more that's used to much more of a like terse language. And
The thing about Objective C that's good that I feel like we're missing is the part of the verbosity that I was thinking in my head, not the verbosity about the like method about constantly typing things, whatever. But was that the method names I feel like are clearer. They're high. They're like, and they're very verbose sometimes, but they're very consistent for one thing, and you understand what's happening. Like I know this is valuable because I recently looked at code I wrote. I don't know how many years ago now, better part of a decade ago. It's horrible code, but the fact that it's written with this verbose style, which goes into like the variable names and my own methods names, like that, because I took that style and put it everywhere to follow the kind of style of the framework. I can read this code and I can actually understand what it's doing. Whereas I remember I used to write Perl a lot, and it was very different. You looked at Perl and it was just a bunch of symbols sometimes here there, and you had to remember what they mean. And in Swift, I get the same kind of deal where there's these shortcuts in the syntax all over the place. And I'm like, I don't need shortcuts when I'm writing code. I feel like Swift is sometimes geared towards shortcuts in writing code when what I really want is clarity when I'm reading code later. And I think Objective C in combination with the tooling did a better job of that balance in like a lot of my experience with it, because it was verbose to write, but it was much clearer to read.
I mean, I don't know about you, Aaron, how you feel particularly, since I don't know if you've done a lot of Objective C.
Not much, just a tiny bit. I was one of the people that looked at iOS when it was first a thing, when the App Store was first launched, and looked at an Objective C book, and I was like, nope. And came back when Swift was a thing.
I've heard that story a lot,
because I'd already learned like JavaScript and Java and other things. So
I had the same feeling when I first did Objective C. I was like, what is this? I couldn't even understand what I was looking at because of all the brackets. You have to get used to seeing it, so they kind of fade a little bit. Even now, you look at a big screen of Objective C, and it can be, you have to you kind of go cross-eyed a little bit. Like, what? It's just so much stuff.
Yeah, I bought the standard textbook, like the Objective C. I think it was Objective C 2.0 at the time.
Oh yeah.
The book, the manual for Objective C, and I looked at it, I was like, what is going on here?
Objective C got updated over the years for a lot of common use cases being a lot cleaner and simpler. Like, you can just do dot notation for a lot of stuff. They cleaned up how you create arrays and dictionaries and stuff like that. They did a lot of things to make the language better. And when Swift came out, it was a little bit of a surprise to some of us because it felt like they were going to make an update to Objective C, like a leaner version of Objective C instead of a completely different language. It works completely differently. But the thing about Objective C that I always liked was the runtime. Like I hacked the runtime. Like I did weird things to the runtime to get to I messed around with those functions occasionally, and there's like I do like method swizzling sometimes, that kind of thing. Like these weird hacks that were in there were fun, but probably not good in the long term.
I mean, I do enjoy a language that will allow you to be as sloppy as you want. And I think sometimes Swift tries its best not to let that happen. Having said that, like it's not as like, I don't know, like sometimes I feel like Ruby gets in my way more than I really care for it, even though it's a very nice language.
You doing a lot of Ruby?
No, I did a bit. And Swift feels similar in that regard, even though like I can still it's weird because like it's on two different spectrums, right? Like on one level, I feel like I can do some really obnoxious stuff in Swift and and have to apologize for it later, right? Like you could do emojis in your text fields or whatever. Like you could do like really absurd stuff in your case statements, for example. But the on the flip side, it was like say, well, this particular styling is what we want you to do for the code.
Like optionals.
Yeah, like optionals are like the big ones. Or like in this case, like right now, I'm fighting up against when and how I do async await stuff, and so it's great once you get it, but like you have to. There is a learning curve to getting it.
Okay, so Koto, I haven't done the async await stuff yet in Swift, but I've done it in C#. And the way it works there is the async stuff is like a virus that once it no, I'm serious. Like this is the way it works. Once you try to do one method with async await, you have to change, you have to then in C#, that now has to be an async method, which means the thing calling it has to be an async method, you have to go all the way up, and you get to the point where it's like I literally the other day had to write one method to make an HTTP call. Just an example, okay? The class that they want you to use is HTTP client, which is like all async. And it's really hard to use it synchronously. Like I think they added in the more recent versions of .NET, they have I think a synchronous call. But the version I was working with, there was no synchronous call, and I really need a blocking call for this. Okay, don't just because it's old legacy code is. And I actually dropped down to a much older API to do it because like I couldn't do it because otherwise you're hacking around the asynchronous stuff. And is Swift async await like that? Like it's a virus where everything up the stack, or is it implemented in some different way where it's a little more easy to integrate in pieces?
It can be. One example is like when I tried to do an async await, and then inside the result of a closure, and that didn't like it at all. It stopped you from doing it until you encapsulated that in a task, which I'm still not familiar with, but I think that's
C# too. Like everything, it's all this stuff works with this concept of tasks, and that's kind of why it all gets crazy because you have to, be returning tasks, not the actual result, because everything's happening. Think about it. When you do an async await, you're putting things in some other thread, so it has to handle that stuff in the background. So it has some kind of framework for doing that.
Right. So sometimes like I keep trying to figure out like because I put things in like those type of tasks in an actor versus a class. So like doing a call to like, pull some data down. And then when I do that, I want to run, like there's another process that happens as a result from a closure, right? Maybe that's legacy code that's happening. It was kind of funny. I was doing that on, it was a different project. I think it was on like some extension, and I was trying to get, and that extension traditionally had, its template had a closure. But they had, and I was trying to do it in a task. I finally figured out to do it. Like when I got the results back from the closure, I just wrapped that async await in a task, and that kind of fixed that problem. But then I realized that same closure, Apple had an async await version of that call. So I just used that, and I was like, oh, it's beautiful now.
And so that just kind of goes to show you when you're doing like greenfield code, and you can use the latest and greatest stuff that Apple or whomever your framework provider is providing, can make your life way easier. If you're working in an older code base, this is where you hit these friction points, and that's where I hit those problems. Now we're in a project where it's all greenfield, so we can use whatever we want. So we're going to use async await where it's appropriate. Did anyone implement anything with async await so far yet? I didn't need to do it yet for notifications because that's handled by the OS, so I don't really do anything like that.
I think you don't need. Like, I don't know how integrated it is for core data related stuff, and even then it's like, we'll have to see like how we write the code. Like, I'm going to probably look at maybe like whatever Aaron's doing and saying, if there's any async await opportunities, I might bring it up to Aaron about.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest one would be processing the JSON was the one.
Yeah. I was looking at that. I was like, oh, should I do this? And I started running into those. Oh, what is it? What's the error of async call and a non-asynchronous context thing or whatever. And it's like, nope. I was like, I don't need to worry about this right now. I'll just do it the old fashioned way.
Yeah. I mean, if it works, it works. I mean, the reason you care about the async await stuff generally is because you want your user interface to not be messed up by the processing of something that's going to take a while.
Except we don't have a UI if we don't have any data. So it's kind of.
I think any opportunities to look into using async await is wherever you're doing a dispatch, global or somewhere that maybe think about an async await approach, but that might be a good starting point. It might not, and it might just be like somewhere where you consider it, not necessarily utilize it.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the best thing for
Yeah, no, I would say my advice is just do it on the main thread until it doesn't work. Like
Yeah.
like
We're
the,
not
the
like doing any networking. That's really where it's like networking stuff, and you're waiting for a response for something. And since we're not really doing any networking in this app for now, I don't think we need it.
We should put a web view in there just for kicks and giggles.
No. Well, what I really want to do, is my demo that I made a million years ago of like passing views between things. I'm gonna like flip cards between other people's devices, which I with like local was it nearby interaction, I think is the framework.
Well, if you want to start another feature branch and stick that in, feel free.
Yeah, no, that's like a 3.0 feature for the app. I don't know how necessary it is. Yeah, I had that working. I think it's a lot easier to do now. To pull up nearby devices and then like fling stuff over.
Like a ninja star.
So, yeah. Basically, I was doing that on the iPhone before.
I think we had joked about that as an idea, as like ninja stars or something.
Yeah, but yeah, I made like a little demo app doing that, and it sort of worked. But yeah,
that's actually really cool. Yeah, that's a good idea. Future features.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's add that. Let's add a card to that. Too late, man. We're adding a card for that.
Yeah, I don't know whether. Yeah, it's a fun little tech demo that I made for that.
Yeah, that'll be like after we get the
core functionality. Yeah. That's in December. Just keep in mind, like the goal of this app is in many ways to test to learn a lot of. I mean, part of the thing aside from like deploying it, and Aaron gets a wonderful app on the App Store. But the other key thing that we're trying to do is get to learn a lot of this specific tech, whether it just be watchOS development in general, async await, core data, you name it, right? Like this counts as a learning experience, and we can expand as much as we want.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I'm taking out. That's why I've been having a good time learning this stuff. Especially for someone like me, because my day job just doesn't let me. A lot of us are working on legacy code bases. Why, and most of the time is on those things, and then it's a challenge, but it's also fun to switch to the more modern way of doing things and try to get your mind wrapped around that.
All right. Well, I've added a card for you, Aaron. It's in to-dos. Don't worry about it. That's a version 2. I probably should even create a tag for that. But we're getting close to the end. So I want to make sure we wrap it up so we're not like over time.
Do we even really talk about our next sprint? Yeah, we turned this into a why Objective-C is the best language ever TED Talk. So,
well, I think we've talked about it a lot in terms of retrospectives of like what we were doing, what we didn't do well last sprint, and what we could do better this sprint. So I think we're kind of okay.
Before the next sprint, one of the questions I had that we still have to resolve here is for notifications specifically, what is the scheduling we want for this kind of thing? Is it I started down the path of kind of following what the Breathe app, or what do they call it now? Whatever they call it.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start, and we can expand on it later.
Yeah, but I don't know what it has these features for start of day and end of day, and I could not figure out where does it get those. What counts as start of day and end of day? Where does it set that?
Is that like your notification summary whenever you get that, or no?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm saying, is it like something that is it pulling that from some setting somewhere else in the watch?
Is it your like wake up time and your?
Yeah, I don't know. That's why it might be. So for us, it might. What I'm saying, it might not apply if it's not some publicly accessible thing, but that concept.
So I think for you, Steve, focusing on the core functionality and allowing for the options for us to be able to set them, like if just say like be able to set them at whatever specific times and then stack them, like schedule them. Basically, that's the real thing that I think that's important. Like figuring out the timing. Like you can set like templates for that if you want, but just figuring out the core mechanics of that's really the most important thing to get done for this sprint. As for you,
and then what's the like action? Do you want just to like totally dismiss the notification, or do you want like another option to like launch the app and say, I want to see more stuff now? Or do you want it to always just kind of go away? Whether you say I know it or I don't know it, it just kind of goes away.
I think it might be 2. Yeah, 3. Know it, don't know it, dismiss, or now 4, I guess, more info or something like that.
Yeah, because then I don't know if you want to say like when you don't know it automatically goes to like the back of the card view in the app.
Well, it's a notification, so we're more limited. You can tap notification, go into the app, or you can do one of these buttons, and then we can respond to it sort of. But it's a notification, it's separate.
I guess a yes no, and I guess if it's intuitive enough, tap onto the notification to go into the app to deep link them into that section. Otherwise, and dismiss, right? Just completely like so. Yes, no, dismiss. Those are the 3 options, and that'll be it.
I mean, yeah, and we want to be able to schedule the specific times you want this thing to remind you.
I like the workout thing where you can say like mute for today and just say like don't show me anymore today. Like I'm sick of these. Go away for today. So that would be a good third option.
To schedule these, there needs to be some method to give me what kanji to schedule next. So that I guess leads into Aaron, right? And your area.
Yeah, well, right now you can just use that random thing, but like I'm working on now that we have stats, I'm going to work on it's like a simple algorithm for like how to weight how many times they've seen it and all that, whether they should be in the up next, and also like what level of like how many, what's the pool I'm pulling from.
You can expound upon that.
Yeah, right now it should just be like one method, and it'll just be like you just call the next one from the and I'll figure it all out.
Wherever we're saving that like frequency, whether we need to update core data for that or to add a parameter for that, but just basically say I want or just add it as a user default, like a frequency default, and just say I just want, or that actually makes sense to me, but like 3 times a day, and then if it's muted, it's muted.
Yeah, because that comes back to I think we talked about this, the complication. You want to have like a thing of if I want to look at 4 in the day, and it'll like show the progress of how many you've looked at. Another thing.
Okay, but you're going to do you're working on the algorithm then for next time to actually, and you're just going to expose it for me and for Kotaro as just a method.
Yeah, it's just going to be like get the next one. It's just going to be like and it returns one. It returns a kanji.
So the other thing, I think for you, Aaron. So what did we say for you to help with expand on those algorithms, the random stuff,
the settings, the stuff for that, and that kind of ties into that too.
Let me play around with trying to set up the the swipe mechanic, and if I have trouble, I will maybe like see where you're at, and maybe we can work together on that.
Yeah, I started trying to do it, and then I was like, I don't know, I'm wasting too much time on this. I just want to get to see. I was wasting too much time just to like see that the data was updating on a view, like that they viewed the card, or that they've said yes, or I know it, or no, I don't. So I just kind of said, oh, that's Kotaro's job. I'll let him handle it. Yeah, but if you're too busy, I can look into it some more. Yeah, I don't know if you are you actually like gonna put cards like in the Z stack, like other cards, or right? Because right now I'm just like updating the same card.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe like probably one card for now, but even then I might not even I might not like activate it until it becomes the active card. So I'm not going to do anything too complicated there.
So this next sprint takes us through Thanksgiving and takes us to the end of the month. So at the end of this, I think if we actually accomplish this, I think we have a working app at the end. We'd have the swipe mechanic and the data stuff that we almost have enough data. We have enough data methods now to actually record the data we need, right, and look it up. So if you have a swipe mechanic, then that's saving the user data, and we already have the kanji in there. And then if we get the notification in there, we basically have a fully featured app, don't we? That kind of works. You can actually look at your kanji. I mean, the more polished, but
yeah. The only problem is that there's no real logic for how many kanji. It just like spits out like all the kanjis or any random kanji from like the entire database. So I need to limit that to a more reasonable number to start. Yeah, and that's my thing I need to work on.
And then we need to start on the App Store Connect stuff in December. I think if we can just submit it by the end of December, I'll count it. We can count it as a success if we, but we really want to get some test flight builds going too.
I will count it as an absolute success if we get it in before Christmas. I will be fine and happy with getting, well, first of all, I'll be fine and happy getting it whenever we get it out. But I think for what we would call this to be a successful project, probably the end of the year, let's say that.
Yeah, and that means that we're going to, by the end of next sprint, wherever we are, we're going to have to make choices if we're not, at that point, we're going to have to like really decide, make some hard cuts possibly next time. So you'll get to hear that.
Yeah, I don't know if the complication is going to make it into the...
Yeah, the complication. I didn't even get to talk about the complication. Maybe next time I can talk about it, because complications are its own complex thing, and I didn't have time to really figure out how to get it to work. I just want to get the freaking app icon in there, and even that requires too many little pieces of code, so I didn't get it done. It's not. I'm sure it's not that hard once you figure it out, but it's one of those things where it's all broken up in a whole bunch of different pieces. So yeah, we might have to. Complications are actually an important part of watchOS stuff, but it might actually, we might actually have to cut that because that's its own kind of little subtopic. Anyway, that's something to think about for next time. So I got down notifications and handle the actions. For me, we got the kanji algorithm and the public method that I'm going to need to use and Kotaro is going to use. That's Aaron's job, and then the swipe mechanic, which is a big job in itself for Kotaro, and then I'll also be doing the podcast for next week.
Maybe I'll take a look at complications if I have time. I'll see. I don't know.
Look at Aaron taking the lead. I like it. Yeah. Well, if you want to crack, just make sure you put a branch out.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't even. There's lots of stuff we can talk about next time too about how we handle that stuff. But for now, I think we're good. I think it's been a successful sprint. I want to say another successful one. We got 80-90% of what 85-90% of what we were trying to accomplish. Right.
Cool. Well, thank you all for coming. And we will see you guys or gals, everyone, in the next episode of Philly Cocoa Side Project Spotlight. I'll get there. Gosh damn it.